we first heard about you in Australia, or I first heard about you, Collision.
Right.
About you and Christopher Hitchens interacting. So you represent one end of that worldview spectrum. He represented the other, and as of course was a great hero. We all regret his death to cancer of the throat. But you managed to build a relationship and to debate one another respectfully, pretty spirited at times, pretty willing.
Right.
But that's pretty interesting. You actually modelled how you could get on and have a conversation and respect one another as human beings.
Right. Christopher Hitchens.
Seems to me. Can I test you on that?
Christopher Hitchens and I got along famously. We got along really, really well.
You wrote a book together.
Yes. A debate together. That's what began our journey together. Then we made a movie, the documentary Collision, which was recorded during our book release tour. And we spent a good bit of time together. And he was a gentleman to me. I've mentioned to you before, the only time he was ever rude to me was on stage as part of his debating style. But in person, he was affable, and we got along very, very well. And his worldview was antithetical to mine. He was an atheist materialist, and I'm a traditional Christian. But one of the ethical tenets of the Christian faith is Jesus says that we're to love our enemies. Christopher Hitchens was a personal friend, but a worldview enemy. And I need to be willing to sit down with anybody and talk about anything. And in the current divide in America, the unwillingness to talk is largely coming from the cancel culture side. The people who have tried to shut me down or shout me down or cancel me or to censor me are all people that I would be happy to have a beer with. I'd be happy to go to lunch with and talk about these things. They're unwilling to reciprocate, and that's the nature of the divide. It used to be that you could have two different worldviews in principle, but you still had enough civility to communicate.
This is what I'm driving at.
Right. But that civility has now gone. And I think it's largely unilateral, largely aimed at traditional Christians, because it's traditional Christianity that creates the bedrock for that civility, right? If there is no God and we're just a concourse of atoms banging down through history, there's no reason. All there is power.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's very notable now about the people who reject Christianity in our culture is that everything's about the pursuit of power. So as I see it, what you modeled, the ability to get on personally at the same time as you vehemently disagreed in terms of your intellectual approach to life, is needed more than ever, because the things that divide us are greater than ever.
Right.
But we've got less confidence in democracy than we've ever had as a means of clearing those differences.
Right.
And at the same time, there's this level of judgmentalism and of hatred and of rejection of anybody who dares to disagree. I would have thought Christopher Hitchens would have despaired at where we've got to. Would that be fair?
I think that would be fair, because he was an atheist of the old school.
Yeah.
Right. And some of the newer breed are atheists that I think are just going with the current zeitgeist of a power play.
Yep.
All right, we're going to shut down everybody.
It's about power.
It's about power.
I should say I know there'll be people who are thinking these issues through. There are many atheists who I think would belong squarely in the Hitchens camp, where sensible debate and interaction matters, and you don't just blithely walk away from it and shut it down, and you don't resort to nastiness.
Right.
But I mean, I found his book much more challenging than some of the other atheists.
Right.
I've got to say that.
God is not great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought, here is a man grappling with the great issues. He's not being trite. He's mounting some arguments that were really very challenging. Mm-hmm. What lay at the heart of his atheism that you found hardest to tackle, if I can put it that way? Yeah. Where was he at most convincing? Because I understand he would say to you, and you know, I've seen him do this on. He's gone now, of course, but he would say, "That's a tough one." You know,
Yeah.
I don't deny that one's I've got to grapple with. What was it that in his saying, his attitude that made you grapple and think again?
I would say that his toughest argument, and I have to be honest, that he didn't get to me on a personal level where I went home and thought, oh my gosh, he's rocked my world. But there were things that he would say and do on stage where I had to think fast. All right, so he was very quick on his feet, very pointed and very witty. So he could get a laugh from the audience. He could get a laugh from a Christian audience, and you say, okay, all right. I've got to deal with him. I've got to deal with the argument, and I've got to deal with his rhetorical genius. So he was a rhetorical genius, and he was quick. He was very quick. As far as the substance of his arguments, probably the things that he cared the most about were, and I noticed if I said something, the two things that would get him going more than anything else would be if I referred to the fatherhood of God, because I think Christopher was driven by fatherlessness, right? So if I mentioned the fatherhood of God, or if I mentioned the vicarious death of Christ on the cross, and those topics would get him going. And I would say that his representation, I'm a Calvinist, which means I believe in the exhaustive sovereignty of God. I believe that God is sovereign over all things. And the toughest challenge that he could mount to me would be, he would represent the fatherhood of God as sort of a religiously based North Korean totalitarian system, right? Where God's in everything and the surveillance cameras are everywhere and you can't make a move. The hairs of your head are all numbered. It's the totalitarian state that's swollen beyond all recognition. And that's what he would attack as the fatherhood of God, right? The dear leader. And that's a tough one to answer. It's a complicated theological subject. How do you have an exhaustively sovereign God and free agency and responsibility on the part of creatures? That's a challenging subject to begin with. And then when you're being questioned by a hostile atheist who understands how challenging it is and is going after you on that point, that's a steep climb.